Today, I will tell you the story of a builder who was revenged by the ghost. The name of the story, If Mass Grave. Mr. Kai is around 38 years old, married to a woman named Tam, who is nearly 10 years his junior. They live a simple, peaceful life in their ward, where Mr. Kai is known for his dedication to social projects. Despite his age, Mr. Kai's work exposes him to the harsh elements of sun and rain, giving him a prematurely aged appearance. His life is one of routine and consistency, with most of his work assigned and overseen by the local ward authorities. One day, he might be laying asphalt. The next, he's involved in some other community improvement project. Today, Mr. Kai was assigned as the project manager to clear out an empty lot that was once an old graveyard located on a high hill. He stood there, gazing out at the vast expanse of land, its towering trees casting long shadows. These ancient trees had stood there for centuries, their massive trunks requiring 3 men to encircle them. They were intertwined with countless old, weathered tombstones, all concealed by a thick carpet of wild grass. Suddenly, a young man's voice broke the silence.
Uncle Kai, why are you standing there?
It was the voice of Sol, a young man in his early 20s who was also part of Mr. Kai's tree-cutting team. Mr. Kai replied sternly,
I'm just estimating how many trees we can cut down today.
Sol, uninterested in Mr. Kai's response, persisted with his question.
Uncle Kai, why are you standing on that grave?
He asked. Startled, Mr. Kai replied,
Oh, is that so? Goodness, who would notice with all this dirt covering it?
Sol pointed towards a gravestone behind Mr. Kai, who, not looking closely, had mistaken it for a mound of earth. Mr. Kai, regaining his composure, gave a loud command.
Today, we'll tackle the 2 largest trees first, everyone.
Gazing up, one could sense the grandeur and age of these trees, weathered by countless centuries. Their expansive canopies stretched out, sheltering dozens of graves beneath. After surveying the surroundings, Mr. Kai divided the team into 2 groups to simultaneously cut down the 2 trees. Just as they were preparing to start, Mr. Kai was suddenly struck by a severe stomachache. He instructed the team to proceed without him, as he urgently sought out a tall bush to relieve himself. About 10 minutes passed. Mr. Kai returned, only to find the team still hesitant to begin cutting. Annoyed, he raised his voice and scolded them. Mr. Kai then attempted to start his chainsaw, but to no avail. Despite repeated attempts, the engine refused to sputter to life. He grumbled and cursed, wondering why it had malfunctioned at such an inopportune moment. Then, the sound of a chainsaw pierced the air. However, it was not Mr. Kai's saw, but the one belonging to Sol's group. Abandoning his own chainsaw, Mr. Kai snatched Sol's and barked orders at him.
You fix my saw, I'll handle this tree.
He gripped the chainsaw tightly and began pushing it into the tree trunk. Sawdust showered down, covering the surrounding graves. Mr. Kai's movements were swift and professional, his eyes gleaming with determination as he prepared to bring down the mighty tree. And finally, the tree succumbed. Its branches crashed together, creating a cacophony like a heavy downpour. Sol, with nimble steps, scurried along the fallen tree trunk, checking for any damage. He came to an abrupt halt, his hands clutching his head in dismay. The tree's upper section had crashed down upon a rather large tomb, shattering it into pieces. Mr. Kai, exhaling a sigh of relief, approached Sol, a cigarette dangling from his lips.
What's got you so worked up? Boy, it's just a tomb.
Sol, at a loss for words, could only clasp his hands together in a gesture of apology and mumble under his breath.
We do what we must for a living. Please forgive us.
Mr. Kai, ever the pragmatist, patted Sol on the shoulder.
Don't worry about it. Kid, just be more careful next time.
Sol nodded gratefully, his initial panic subsiding. Having completed the day's task, Mr. Kai headed home. by the fact that they had only managed to fell one tree. The remaining work would have to wait until the next day. They had cut the smaller sections of the tree into manageable pieces and transported them back to the warehouse. Upon arriving home, he was greeted by his wife, Tam, who stood waiting at the door. She held an aluminum basin in her hands, containing a few sheets of newspaper. Mr. Kai, puzzled by her actions, watched as she lit the newspaper on fire inside the basin and instructed Mr. Kai to jump over it before he entering the house. She explained that she knew he had been working at the graveyard today, a place with many graves, and was therefore susceptible to bringing bad spirits home. Mr. Kai, unimpressed by her explanation, kicked the basin aside and scolded her for her superstitious beliefs. Frustrated by her inability to convince her husband, Tam silently cleaned up the mess, not daring to argue with his stubborn nature. A meal was already prepared and waiting for them inside. Mr. Kai tossed his chainsaw into the corner and immediately dug into his food, skipping his usual shower routine. The malfunctioning chainsaw had left him in a foul mood, which his wife, seated beside him, felt the brunt of. As the night deepened, Mr. Kai drifted off to sleep, leaving Tam to washing the dishes. As the night wore on, the house fell silent, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Tam, her chores completed, sat quietly, her thoughts drifting to her husband and the challenges they faced together. She knew that Mr. Kai's gruff exterior masked a kind and caring heart, and she was determined to bridge the gap between their differing worldviews. In the dead of night, Tam was jolted awake by the sound of a chainsaw. She let out a piercing scream, startling Mr. Kai from his sleep. Before him lay the scene of chaos caused by the malfunctioning chainsaw. Mr. Kai examined the device, suspecting a jammed button or some other technical glitch that had triggered the erratic behavior. Unable to shake off the disturbance, Tam remained awake, her gaze fixed intently on her husband. Mr. Kai, sensing her unease, offered words of reassurance and tried to calm her down. The following morning, Tam shared the joyous news that she was pregnant. Mr. Kai's face lit up with delight. For them, having a child was a blessing they had long desired. Mr. Kai's gruff demeanor softened, replaced by a newfound tenderness towards his wife. Their days settled into a rhythm of domestic bliss, their work progressing smoothly. Meanwhile, Sol harbored a lingering anxiety about the graveyard. He would often make rounds near the graves, hoping to appease any lingering spirits. Mr. Kai, out of concern for his pregnant wife's well-being, tried to limit her involvement in strenuous tasks. However, Tam's independent spirit and determination to contribute to the household made it difficult for her to accept his protective measures. Tam's sleep continued to be disturbed by unsettling dreams. She would find herself back in their home, lying in bed, only to be awakened by the presence of shadowy figures standing silently in the room. Their faces were indistinct, their eyes fixed upon her with an unreadable gaze. These dreams left her feeling suffocated and trapped, as if under the weight of an unseen force. Fearing her husband's skepticism and his aversion to anything supernatural, Tam kept her nightmares to herself. One afternoon, Mr. Kai surprised Tam with a beautifully crafted wooden crib. The sight of it filled her with a sense of hope and anticipation, a symbol of the new life they were about to welcome into their world. She believed that the arrival of their child would soften his hardened exterior and bring a newfound gentleness to his spirit. Despite the tranquility of their domestic life, underlying tensions persisted. The mounting pressure of work and the impending arrival of their child weighed heavily on Mr. Kai, contributing to his occasional outbursts of irritability. As Mr. Kai meticulously assembled the crib, Tam's eyelids grew heavy with drowsiness. The midday sun cast long shadows through their home, inviting her to surrender to the embrace of sleep. Tam went to bed, closed her eyes, and slowly drifted off to sleep. After a while, she heard rustling sounds around her. She opened her eyes sleepily. Tam was shocked to see many people standing in the middle of the house. There were many more than in her previous dreams. They were standing there, staring at Mr. Kai. At this moment, she felt her body as if falling into an abyss. Something was pressing down on her. It made her unable to breathe. The suffocation reached its peak. She woke up with a start. Her heavy breathing startled Mr. Kai.
What's wrong?
Mr. Kai asked. Tam slowly regained her composure, but didn't know what to say.
No, it's nothing. I'm pregnant, so I get tired and have trouble breathing sometimes.
Hearing his wife's words, Mr. Kwong also let it go. The next morning, taking advantage of her husband's absence, Tam took out the incense sticks from the closet and burned 3 sticks. She bowed around the house because she knew that the people she saw in her dream last night were those who belonged to the underworld.
I pray to you, sir and madam. My family doesn't worship anything. I hope you understand. My family also has an owner. I hope you will visit and leave. Don't stay in the house and make trouble.
Tam hopes that, from now on, everything will be smoother and more peaceful. It was getting dark and her husband still not coming back. She took out her phone and saw that she had missed a few calls from Seoul. Before she could call back, there was a hurried knock on the door. She opened the door and saw Seoul helping Mr. Kai back. Mr. Kai's hand was bandaged. He said that while he was inspecting the construction site, he accidentally fell and his hand got caught in a steel squish machine and was pulled straight in and shattered. It was lucky that his colleague turned off the machine in time. Otherwise, his arm would not have been intact anymore. At that time, someone also phoned on Tam, but the phone was on silent mode, so she didn't hear it. Tam felt very uneasy and worried when she saw her husband like that. And from now on, Mr. Kai had to stay at home with his wife because his hand was injured. The two of them leaned on each other and took care of each other. Then the sky entered the rainy season. The incessant rain day and night. Mr. Kai's house also became gloomy, cold, and damp in a strange way. Tam kept having colds and hypoglycemia. Because she was pregnant, she didn't dare to take many antibiotics for fear of affecting her baby, so her health gradually deteriorated. The wooden furniture in the house was always damp, and especially the cradle that Mr. Kwong had just made. There were stains on the surface of the table. It looked very strange. Looked like a long, wrinkled, distorted, and deformed face. It was pouring rain outside today. Tam put a pot of hot rice on the table. But she was startled to see that the face on the table was no longer a single face, but many different faces had appeared. They crowded together and expressed a mixture of emotions. To avoid upsetting his wife and affecting her pregnancy, Mr. Kai covered the monstrous faces with a tablecloth. The heavier the rain, the darker the night, and the more thunder and lightning there was. Tam lay restlessly, unable to sleep. Seeing his wife tossing and turning, Mr. Kai comforted her. Tam truly felt that there was something strange going on in her house. She put aside her husband's prejudices and spoke out about what she had been thinking for the past time. While staying at home to recuperate from her pregnancy, she often sprained her ankle as if someone was pulling her leg. Then she had dreams of many ghosts standing in the house. Now she saw faces appear on the table. Tam asked her husband if he had done anything to offend the spirits when he went to cut down a tree in the cemetery a few months ago so that they could know to pray for forgiveness. Mr. Kai still didn't believe in ghosts. Although he admitted that he had broken a large grave, he said that sooner or later the grave would be exhumed and leveled for building school. Hearing these shocking stories, Tam had not had time to be surprised when a strong wind suddenly blew, bursting open the window and blowing into the house, lifting the tablecloth. The couple then discovered that the faces on the table had changed their emotions. Instead of being sad, they were now frowning angrily in a chilling way. Perhaps the spirits in the grave had been offended by Mr. Kai, so they followed him back home and haunted his family. At dawn, Mr. Kai was also persuaded by his wife to go to the cemetery with her to make an offering of apology. When they got there, the couple were shocked to see that the large grave that Mr. Kwong had broken was being dug up by everyone. Tam ran over to see, and not only her, but the people digging the grave were also very surprised, because this grave contained many corpses. This grave was like a mass grave. Although the bodies had decomposed, it was still possible to see the bodies lying side by side, stacked on top of each other, nearly 20 in all. It was truly horrifying. Mr. Kai and Tam immediately laid out fruits, money, and gold to make an offering of apology. While walking around to stick incense sticks, Mr. Kai slipped and fell into the grave that was being dug. He fell onto some corpses, and because his arm was in a cast, he panicked and struggled for a long time to get out of the pile of corpses. Some skulls open and their mouths wide, as if they were laughing out loud, which was very scary. It took a while for the people to help him climb out of the grave. Tam was crying and scared because she was the one who understood what was happening to her husband. Mr. Kai was almost exhausted. Everyone still remembered that he was the one who had broken this grave. Perhaps today they had pulled his leg and made him fall, as if they wanted him to be buried with them.